standard. Now this is me, myself and I, interpreting myself, judging myself, and concluding. All this happens internally. So it is me judging myself according to what I see, according to what I know, according to what I believe, and I conclude that because my fingers are not equal, I conclude that I am flawed, I am not perfect. What happens when I interpret myself this way? Because I believe that I am not perfect, because I believe that I am flawed, this is not just a thought. This becomes internalized truth that I walk in. It is me judging myself. I act as the judge and then as the one that is being judged. So this is me interpreting myself, this is me judging myself, this is me creating meaning about myself, and then I walk in that wrong interpretation of the self. So that happens when man started knowing good and evil. He started judging events and himself according to his standard, according to what he thinks, according to what he knows. So this is me now judging my own self and concluding internally that this is who I am. For example, I have judged my hand, I've judged my fingers that they are not equal, even when fingers are not supposed to be equal. But because of that judgment and misinterpretation, I conclude that I am flawed, I am not perfect. So when I conclude that I am not perfect, it is not just a thought. It becomes an internalized belief about the self. So I start walking and behaving like I am flawed, like I am not perfect. So this does not just end at thinking. It becomes the reality that I walk in. I am flawed, I am not perfect. But remember, it is a misinterpretation. It is a judgment that is wrong. It is an interpretation that is wrong. But because it is internal in me, I start walking in it. I act as the judge. I act as the one that forms meaning out of the event, and that interpretation, that conclusion becomes a reality that I walk in. So it is me judging my hand. My fingers are not equal, yet even when they are supposed to be this way, but my judgment and interpretation starts affecting me. So I judge myself that I am flawed, I am not perfect because the fingers are not equal, and then I start walking in that as the truth. So I am flawed, I am perfect becomes an identity that I walk in. So when I believe that I am flawed, when I believe that I am not perfect, automatically shame activates in me. When I believe that I am flawed, when I believe that I am not perfect, I start feeling shame because I perceive myself as less, I perceive myself as below the standard. But this is me judging myself and concluding and then walking in that wrong judgment. So because of the wrong interpretation, I end up with a false interpretation of the self and start walking in that false interpretation of the self as reality. So because I've interpreted myself as flawed and not perfect, I start walking in this identity. Who am I now? I am flawed. I am not perfect. So this becomes a false identity that I believe about the self, and I start operating in it. Remember, it is me that has judged myself, and then I start walking in that judgment. So that interpretation that I have made, I conclude that this is who I am, and because I believe that this is who I am, I start operating in that wrong identity. Remember the example that I gave you, that when I interpret a cup as a plate, I start using it as a plate. So this happens to humanity. Humanity have tendencies of interpreting themselves wrongly and then walk in that wrong interpretation as who they truly are. So according to this example, I interpreted my arm wrongly, and because of that wrong interpretation, I start perceiving myself as flawed or as not perfect. But remember, it is my own judgment, my own conclusion, but I start walking in it like it is the truth. Ladies and gentlemen, when man started knowing good and evil, when man started interpreting events and himself according to him, he tends to interpret events wrongly and then walking in that wrong conclusion, and that wrong conclusion starts affecting him. So I have wrongly interpreted the self, I am flawed, I am not perfect. This leads to shame. The moment I perceive or interpret myself wrongly, it leads to shame because I start feeling like I am less. Something is wrong with me. How I can explain this is, let's say I have one arm. Let's say something bad happened to me and I lost one arm. When I lost that one arm, I perceive that something is wrong with me. This is evident. It is true. There is something wrong. Because I have one arm, I lost one arm. So I only have one arm. This is an example. So when someone abuses me, pointing at the flaw that I have in me, I automatically start feeling shame. So this is someone else judging me according to what is wrong about me. So that leads to shame. When let's say I have one arm and then someone abuses me or points to the flaw that I have about me, I start feeling bad. That bad feeling, that painful experience, that distressing experience of shame is hurting because someone has pointed at a flaw that I have about me. That distressing pain, that distressing feeling of shame that I get feels so bad. So the brain interprets that pain as physical pain. It is as painful. The brain interprets that pain the same way it interprets physical pain. So what happens is, when I judge myself wrongly, I feel the same kind of pain. For example, like, let's say I have one arm and someone judges me or someone points at that part of me. I feel bad. I feel shame. The same way when I judge myself wrongly, I feel the same kind of pain and shame internally. Even when it is me that is judging myself, even when it is internal and not external. So when I perceive myself as flawed, I start feeling the same kind of pain, the same kind of distressing pain, because I believe I am less, because I believe I am below a required standard. So the same way it happens when someone does it externally is the same way it happens when I judge myself internally. It feels the same way. Shame does not need something external. Shame can happen internally. I can judge myself and conclude and then start walking in shame. That is one thing about shame. Shame and fear do not need someone external to judge me. They do not need something external. They just, I just have to believe that I have something that is wrong about me, and then I start feeling shame. So that is one thing about shame. So when I wrongly judge or interpret myself, I can start walking in shame internally. I have internally judged myself, and then according to that wrong judgment and interpretation about the self, I start walking in shame. And when I start walking in shame, when I wrongly judge myself, I start perceiving that everyone else is seeing me the same way, so they are as well judging me the same way I am judging myself. For example, in this case, I wrongly judged my hand that it is flawed, and then I start feeling that I am flawed. I start believing that I am flawed and I am not perfect. So internally, that is what I believe about myself. But I as well project that interpretation, I as well project that belief to others. I start thinking that others are as well judging me the same way. I start believing that others are seeing the flaws that are on me or that are in me. And ladies and gentlemen, this interpretation is attached to who I am. That is the wrong thing about shame. It attaches a wrong interpretation or meaning to the self. So it feels like this is who I am. I am flawed. I am not perfect. So I start believing that this is who I am, and then I start walking in that false interpretation of the self. What happens is I might not even know that I have internalized that belief or that wrong identity about the self, but I start operating in it. Just like I explained that when I misinterpret a cup as a plate, I can start using it as a plate. So it is the same way. When I wrongly interpret and judge myself, I can start working in that wrong interpretation of myself as the true identity of who I truly am. Because it is happening internally, I am the judge and I am the one that is being judged. So that is one thing about shame and fear. So shame says something is wrong with me. Shame attacks the self. Shame attacks the identity. So something is wrong with me. That is what shame says. So according to the wrong interpretation of the self, I concluded that I am not perfect. I concluded that I am flawed. So that activates shame in me. That triggers shame because I've wrongly perceived myself as below the required standard. Internally, I have interpreted myself as below the required standard. I have interpreted myself as unacceptable. According to my interpretation, I have wrongly interpreted myself. I have wrongly judged myself. So I now believe that is who I am. For example, in this case, I am flawed. I am not perfect, but it is because of a wrong interpretation of the self. So when I conclude that I am flawed, when I conclude that I am not perfect, that activates shame. That activates shame. Remember, shame is painful. Shame is distressing. Shame is uncomfortable. So the brain treats the pain that comes from shame the same way it interprets the pain that is physical. The brain treats emotional pain the same way it treats physical pain. So when I wrongly interpret myself, it leads to shame. It triggers shame. When it triggers shame, shame is painful, shame is distressing, shame is hurting. So the brain interprets shame as a dangerous emotion, as a painful experience, as a distressing experience. So according to the wrong judgment, it triggered shame in me. And shame is painful, shame is distressing. So what happens? Because shame is painful, because shame is distressing, I start organizing behaviors around avoiding this same kind of pain again. When I face shame, shame is painful, shame is distressing, shame is hurtful. So I start organizing behaviors around avoiding these painful experiences again. When shame is triggered in me, it is painful, it is distressing, it is hurting. That is why when shame is activated in me, the brain starts organizing behaviors around protecting myself from feeling shame again. So how does it work? It works this way. This is shame that we are talking about. It works this way. I have interpreted myself as flawed. I have interpreted myself as not perfect. So, these become identities that I walk in. They are false identities, but I conclude like they are truth, and then I start walking in them. These activate shame. When they activate shame, shame is a painful emotion. Shame is a hurtful experience. Shame is distressing. Shame is uncomfortable. So the brain treats it as dangerous. What happens is when I wrongly interpret myself, I start feeling shame, that painful experience to the brain. When I feel shame, because it hurts, because it is painful, because it is distressing, the brain starts organizing behaviors so that I do not feel that same pain again. This is how it works. Because I have felt shame before and it is painful, the brain starts organizing behaviors to prevent me from feeling the same kind of pain again. How? I can become a people pleaser. Why do I become a people pleaser? So that people do not see the flaws in me, because when they see them, they might judge me and I feel shame again. And shame is distressing, shame is painful. So what happens? The brain builds behaviors to make me a people pleaser. I start pleasing others. I become a people pleaser. That is one. I become a fame seeker. Why do I become a fame seeker? So that I have a status whereby no one will judge me, according to the perceived flaws. So these behaviors are built, these behaviors my brain builds so that they protect me from feeling this experience of shame again. So this is how shame shapes behaviors. This is how shame shapes behaviors. For example, now I believe I am not perfect. I am not perfect. Because I believe I am not perfect, I believe others see me the same way. I believe others judge me the same way internally. So I become a people pleaser. Why? To avoid judgment. When I please others, they will not judge me. I become arrogant. Why? Well, because I believe when I am arrogant, people will not question me about myself. So they will not see the flaws in me. But remember, these flaws are not real. It is just a false judgment. It is just a wrong judgment and interpretation of the self. But I now walk like I am not perfect. I now walk like I am flawed. So these become identities that I walk in. What happens is this operate internally that I might not know I carry these beliefs. I am not perfect. I am flawed. I am wrong, I am unworthy. But they come from a misinterpretation of events and then a false conclusion from the misinterpretation, which I now internalize as who I am. So it becomes a false identity that I walk in even when I do not know. I might not know intellectually that I believe I am not perfect, but that is the identity that I carry internally. It is a wrong identity, but I start operating in it. So it builds behaviors. For example, people pleasing, fame seeking, arrogance. Because I believe I am not perfect, I can become a perfectionist. To hide the perceived flaws. Because I believe when I am perfect, because I believe when I am a perfectionist, no one will see the flaws in me. First of all, the very first thing is the flaws are not true. They came from a wrong judgment and interpretation of the self. But I walk in them like they are the truth of who I am. That happens, ladies and gentlemen. And humans have a tendency of interpreting reality through shame and fear. And these start shaping our lives. These start shaping behaviors. These start influencing how how these start influencing relationships, these start influencing the jobs that we do. So these behaviors are not just one-time behaviors. They become behaviors that I operate in, not knowing why. I just find myself people pleasing. I just find myself badly wanting to be famous. I just find myself arrogant. I just find myself becoming a perfectionist, not knowing underneath me there is a false belief that I am not perfect. I am flawed, and it is this false belief that is shaping behaviors. It is this false identity that is shaping how I operate. It is this false identity that is shaping how I operate in life. It is this false identity that is shaping the relationship and my behaviors. So what happens is we have tendencies of wrongly interpreting ourselves and then conclude and walk in that conclusion as the truth of who we are. So it becomes a false identity that we walk in and operate in, ladies and gentlemen. But it all roots from fear and shame. And these were evident in Eden when man disobeyed God. He fell into fear, he fell into shame. These two conditions. Another thing is, because I believe I am not perfect, because I believe I am flawed, I believe that is who I am. It becomes an identity that I walk in. I perceive myself as not safe because I believe I am not perfect. So I believe I am not safe to be seen. I believe I am not safe as I am. That is fear. Fear says I am not safe because I believe I am below a required standard, because I believe I am less according to a required standard. So I start believing that I am not safe because I am not perfect. So I am not safe. Something might happen to me because I am not perfect. Something wrong might happen to me because I am flawed. So this false interpretation of the self starts shaping behaviors. So because I believe I am not perfect, so I fear that I am not safe given the condition that I am in, given that I am not perfect, so I am not safe. What happens if I believe that I am not safe? I try to find all ways to make sure I am safe. So if I believe I am not safe, then I must protect myself. If I believe I am not safe, I must protect myself. That is what I believe internally, because I believe I am not perfect, because I believe I am flawed. So I am not safe as I am. Why? Other people might judge me. When they judge me, that is distressing, that is painful. So internally, I believe I am not safe. That is fear. I am not safe. Others might judge me, others might hurt me because I believe I am below a required standard. So I am not safe. One pattern, a pattern that we can see here in Genesis is, man said, Genesis chapter 3 verse 9, then the Lord God called to Adam and said to him, where are you? So he said, I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked and I hid myself. I was afraid because I was naked and I hid myself. Something we can see here in the Bible is nakedness. Man interpreting nakedness, or man experiencing nakedness as exposure, led to covering. Man interpreting nakedness as exposure led to him covering himself. Man sewed fig leaves. They sewed fig leaves and they covered their nakedness. Man interpreted nakedness as exposure, so they covered themselves. Man interpreted his condition as not safe. So when man became aware of his nakedness, he hid himself. So fear led to hiding. I was afraid because I was naked and I hid myself. Then shame led to covering. We can see hiding and covering. So this is man's attempt to hide shame and to manage fear. I was afraid and I hid myself. I was afraid because I was naked and I hid myself. The very first thing they did is they made coverings to cover the nakedness. So shame, covering, fear, hiding. This is a pattern that we can see in Eden. So ladies and gentlemen, this is the sequence we can see here. Wrong interpretation, wrong interpretation leads to wrong conclusion. Wrong interpretation, wrong conclusion, wrong behaviors. Wrong interpretation, wrong conclusion, wrong behaviors. For example, when I interpret a cup as a plate, I use the cup to serve food. So what happens is man interprets himself wrongly and then he concludes that that is who I am according to the wrong according to the wrong interpretation, and he starts operating in that wrong or false identity as the true self. So that is what happens when man started knowing good and evil. Man started interpreting events and himself according to his own standard, according to what he thinks, according to what he knows, according to how he understands events. So man started interpreting himself and events, which lead to a wrong interpretation, a wrong conclusion at times, and a wrong identity. So man walks in that wrong identity. Wrong interpretation, wrong conclusion, then a false conclusion of the self, or a false identity. False identity. Wrong interpretation and wrong judgment of self and events, wrong conclusion, false identity or false interpretation of events. That is what happens. And ladies and gentlemen, because we all inherited the sinful nature, man has tendencies of interpreting events wrongly, leading to wrong conclusions and wrong identities. What happens when man wrongly interprets an event? When he interprets something wrongly or an event wrongly, he concludes wrongly, leading to a false conclusion, a false interpretation of the self, and then he starts working in that false interpretation or that false identity.